Thanks, everyone. This next session is intended to give a spotlight to 3 amazing individuals who are working on tools that I think you'll find to be very important to your work. The first person I'm going to bring up here to speak about a new report in grant making that has been produced by the grant makers in film and electronic media is Alice Myatt.
Thank you very, very much, Allison. And actually, I'm going to stay here because I've got my notes here. And as I understand it, we talk for 5 minutes and then we take your questions for 5 minutes. Basically, I have 10 minutes. And so I'm going to start from the assumption that all of you are smart. Okay?
Closer to the mic.
Okay. I'm going to assume that all of you are really smart and all of you can read, which is actually a privilege given many people in the world. So I am not going to give you a PowerPoint. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes and sort of tell you a little bit about who we are. I know that a lot of you in the audience already know who we are, but then there are those of you who don't. We are a membership organization of funders, and we don't make grants. I don't recommend your projects to our members. I don't tell you who our members are. Philanthropy is a very secret organization. But what I can do is tell you about what we hear and what we see and what the folks that we interact with are doing these days. Before I do that, I want to once again recognize Paco and Pam for the terrific presentation they did this morning. And if you don't remember anything about today, other than Paco and Pam, the fact that they told you that outreach and engagement is critical and that you should establish your NGO partners at the beginning. Because our members and the people who come to GFEM are really not interested in your film so much. What they're interested in is a tool that will advance their issue area. And whether that issue area is human rights, or whether it's education, or whether it's children, youth, and families, they really want tools that will put a face on their issue, that will translate data into humanity. And so that's what you have to bring to the table, a tool. And that comes through your outreach, and it is supported by the partners that you've established going in for your funding. I should also tell you that The Reckoning was a winner of the Council on Foundations Film and Video Festival this year, and they received a Henry Hampton Award. And we are open for submissions right now. The deadline is the 25th of June. So if you have a finished film, go to fundfilm.org, fundfilm, one word, .org, and you will see the application for submissions for the festival that will start next May, or next April, rather. Let me tell you a little bit about the changing nature of funders. There are more funders. There was more wealth generated in this country in the past 2 decades than ever before. But what that means is that we have living donors, and living donors are very different than institutional donors. And very often they want to, they come to the table very business-minded because that's how they generated their wealth. They tend to be more hands-on, and they're more media savvy. And so it is unlike ever before when, you know, there were 3 or 4 big foundations, Ford, MacArthur, et cetera, and you got, you know, a nice chunk of change to go make your film. It's a little bit harder now. Maybe you need 5 grants to equal 1 from a large institutional funder. Maybe you'll have a grant maker sitting kind of on your shoulder. It's really important to determine the lines, and I'm sure Shetty will tell you a little bit about that. But that's what we're seeing. A lot of our members now are living donors, small family foundations, and they're very, very engaged in social issues, but very particular social issues. This past April, May, the Council on Foundations, one of the themes was social justice. And that made us very encouraged because many foundations, as you probably know, they don't support advocacy, they don't support social justice, they don't support, they support animal rescue. And that's okay because then we took a film about the pets that were separated from their owners in Katrina and showed them that film and got them excited about implementing a pet strategy in the disaster planning in their communities. So what we try to do is to insert media wherever we can and help funders understand the power of media and help them understand how to support it and how to support it well. I think that the other thing I can tell you is that a lot of the funders do not understand new media. And even though new media is not new media anymore, it's kind of old media, but they don't, they pride themselves in saying, well, I don't watch television except for the news hour. And we try to let them know that that may be their personal choice, but there's the rest of the world that's doing all of these really interesting things on these multiple platforms. And we encourage them to ask you, when you ask for support, we encourage them to ask you, what are your plans for reaching your targeted audience? So if you're doing something that is targeted to young adults, do you have a strategy that is not about airing on PBS, but perhaps on mobile platforms or on the web, et cetera, et cetera. Last year, we took a funder delegation to South by Southwest, and we had 7 funders with us. This year, South by Southwest Interactive, not the film side, although we do encourage them to go see films, but specifically South by Interactive. So we had 7 funders. This year, we had 31. And we were really, really excited. And as a result of our first go-round, a group of funders came together and put out a request for proposals for new media applications to advance progressive ideas. And so funders can change, funders are growing, funders are very different than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but you have to be there and be ready with your strategy for not only production, not only distribution, but dissemination. And that's a very different thing than going to festivals and getting on POV or et cetera, et cetera. It has to be much broader. It has to be a tool that's going to bring about social change. Many of you know we have a database that you can upload your work in progress, not just films, but also infrastructure projects, such as mobile phone applications or web projects. If you're an advocate, and I hope that there are some media advocates in the audience here, you can put up your policy project on our database. The URL for that is media.gfem.org. media.gfem.org. And right now we have, I think, around 600 pieces. And again, they run the gamut from documentary films, we have radio projects, we have media elements for a staged opera, we have websites. Oh. What? Okay, well, one last thing. One last thing. We just issued a report, and if you want to have a better understanding of grant makers, you can take a look at our report. It has a series of recommendations. It is designed for the funding community, and it's entitled Funding Media Strengthening Democracy, and you can find it on our homepage of gfem.org. And it makes 10 recommendations for changing grant making in the 21st century. And the recommendations run the gamut from being more collaborative, being more open, being behaving better with your grantees. Among the principal recommendations, though, is to design a system, a database, where all grants can be found in real time. We live in an era where all information has to be readable by machines. And so we recommend that the entire philanthropic sector make that adjustment, and it will then be able to identify what grants are media grants. Are they going in a particular area? Are there gaps that need to be filled? So as a filmmaker, you would be able to search and see no one's covering this topic, and this is really important, and perhaps I can bring that forward. So again, it's called Funding Media, Strengthening Democracy. It's on our website. The PDF is downloadable. And hopefully we are looking for feedback, and there's a place to put comments on the site, or you can email me with your reactions and responses.
And I think we'll take questions at the end of our three speakers, if that's okay. Next up is Jessica Clark, who is the director of the Future of Public Media Project with us at the Center for Social Media, to talk about some new research.
Hi. How many of you were here last year? All right, so you might have remembered that one of the lunch tables was really crowded and people were all sort of whispering around it. That was the one where I was asking them to talk about best practices in impact measurement. And what we found at that lunch, and in many subsequent conversations, is that people have a lot of questions about how to measure the impact of their media projects. And I'm going to give you some highlights from two reports we're issuing today that are available at futurepublicmedia.net, which will redirect you to the Center for Social Media page. And in the report that Alice was just talking about, one of the recommendations is that funders actually work to develop impact measurement rubrics. So what we decided to do, given the excitement around the table, is work with a few allied organizations that run networks of independent media producers or outlets to really have a set of conversations about how people are doing this and what needs they have. We called these the Impact Summits. We held them in 7 cities over the course of the spring, and the two reports I just mentioned, we issued one called Investing in Impact, which is about the needs and the tools that we recommend related to impact assessment for public and social issue media. The second one is a demonstration project. We worked with the Maker's Quest project that Julie mentioned earlier. She's demoing it out in the lobby to try to evaluate a series of projects related to the Maker's Quest. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. And we're working on one more piece, which is a scan of best practices, trying to see how the field is really capturing this kind of impact data right now and what's still missing. So at each of the impact summits, we wanted to give people a sense of how the shift from broadcast to broadband, interactive, open, participatory might affect the way that they think about impact. And as Paco was saying earlier today, one of the signature ways that media impact is changing is that the formation of networks is a new goal for media makers. You don't just want to have a screening, you don't just want to have go to a festival. You want people to take your work and use it to form what we call publics. So we look at 4 different types of networks that you can interface with as media makers, and I'll put this presentation up online too so you can take a closer look at these pictures. But just real quickly, media projects are interfacing with, are forming networks with individuals, self-organized networks, so those pet lovers. Say there's a pet lovers Facebook group, you might connect with them to distribute and gather feedback around your project. Institutional networks, like NGOs, we heard a bit about that earlier. And then networks of institutions. We're seeing media outlets working together, like the Economy Story collaboration that was mentioned, where several public broadcasting organizations have sort of teamed up to talk about the financial crisis. And then this hybrid model, maybe around an election, that's sort of a common reason for all of these pieces to snap into place. When everybody's covering, everybody's talking, everyone's sharing media. So we're seeing that these new structures, we call them gridworks, my co-author and I were the ones who developed these, are the sort of the new way in which information is moving from person to person and into the public sphere. And one more thing that we wanted to point out to the people who came to the summits is it's also changing the way that you work with your users, with your audiences. So you can actually engage with your audiences all the way through this production cycle, helping you come up with your concepts, helping to create content and incorporate it, Aggregation and repackaging created related links, related images, amplification, spreading the word, mobilization, which is a controversial one, but for the more activist projects among us, it's an important one. Impact assessment itself, asking them how the piece of media moved them, and then, of course, fundraising, everybody's favorite way to engage their users. And we don't say that everybody should be doing all of this, but these are all options, and this is sort of a checklist where you can think about how to construct your project differently. So, the first report, Investing in Impact, the first question is, why do you assess impact? I mean, some of the journalists in the rooms that we brought together were sort of put off by this concept. They would say, well, you know, that would mean we couldn't have freedom of speech. And our assertion is, no, you can report on whatever you like, we just want to know what happens when you do it. So here's some reasons you might want to assess your impact. If you have a mission, you want to make sure you're actually doing something that's in concert with it. You want to set up benchmarks and impact assessment tools for iterative strategic planning so that you can check and make sure you're on course and if you're actually, you know, making a difference as you go. Obviously, to gain support from funders, we all know about that. And also, again, to be engaged with your users and tell them, you know, what's happening with your film or your mobile project or your reporting project. We asked each of the summit attendees to give us feedback about how they were measuring each of these elements of impact, we call them. And the idea of this framework is that if you go through and you think through how you might measure these and how these apply to your project, you'll get a much more three-dimensional, well-rounded sense of the difference that your project is having. The impact in the middle is the thing that you're aiming for. And so this could be a different procedure depending on what your mission is. We talk a lot about how our mission, we think the mission for public media projects is to form publics who can learn about, debate, and act around issues. So that's the impact we're examining. At the end of the day, after all those conversations, we identified a set of new tools that are needed, and we're hoping to work with some of our allies to build these, or that some magical developer will come along and build them for us. These include a unified social media dashboard that could be shared by different kinds of social issue and public media projects to track not just what's going on their websites, but what's going on across platforms like Facebook and Flickr and Delicious, places where so many of our users are now going. A social issue buzz tracker, which would help to track the movement of a term or a film or, you know, a discussion across platforms and over time. A lot of people ask for formats for impact reporting, ways to help them tell their story of impact. Shared survey questions. People don't know a lot about it. Media makers don't know a lot about their audiences, and they'd like to know more. And then this question of how do you track network growth and network health? Because you could form a network, and then it could die very quickly. So how do you sort of keep your network going, grow your network? In Spreading the Zing, we took some of the framework and put it into action to try to evaluate the Maker's Quest projects. So these were 8 projects. They were administrated by the Association of Independents in Radio. They were all multi-platform, participatory, and producer-led. They started as radio broadcasts, but moved out from there. Each of them was given $48,000 by the CPB and assigned a broadcast partner, either a station or a program. And they had 5 months, right? Approximately, to try to make it happen. And they had all kinds of different formats. Some of them started as Facebook first, some of them started as blogs first, some of them started as broadcasts first. So this was a really rich opportunity to see what would happen and what could we tell about their impact. So I worked in particular with one project that really took off, and what we see that is called the Mapping Main Street. And what it does is, it started with 3 stories, you can see them up there, about different main streets around the US, kind of challenging the stereotype we have of Main Street that's in the news. You know, from Wall Street to Main Street. And then it really asked people to contribute their own content about their main streets. And in this visualization, we take a look at what we call the ripple effect. It shows how different kinds of institutions picked up the project because it had an open architecture and used it for education, used it to engage their communities, used it for artistic purposes. And you can see towards the end is kind of the dream. There's more than 10,000 main streets. And if this goes on, which it has gone on past the point of the funding. More and more material will be posted about the main streets, and we'll have a much richer sense of the country. And this is the kind of visualization that if we built the tools that we needed, we might be able to get this and replicate it and do different kinds of impact assessment. So I wanted to leave you with a few of the lessons that the MQ2 producers came up with after their crash experience. I thought these were nice. Remain solution-oriented. Don't get discouraged. Know what you don't know. A lot of us don't know how to do these new media platforms, but find good partners. Aggressively seek out mentors and partners. We've heard a lot today about how to work with other kinds of organizations besides media production. And then learn the art of self-promotion. So to that end, let me once again promote futurepublicmedia.net is where you'll find more about these reports.
So as Alice was saying, this is a really exciting time for social issue film, but it's also particularly challenging. There are new funders emerging, and as Alice said, funders really want to know what your community engagement strategy is. I've had a chance to talk to some folks outside, and I know people are thinking about it, but it sometimes feels kind of like a new and daunting territory. And what makes it even more challenging is that these new kind of issue-focused funders are emerging that have never really funded media before, so they don't really know what to expect, they just know that they really want something that's going to have an impact. So Active Voice did some research. We interviewed some filmmakers and funders to dig a little deeper, to really get a sense of where people were coming from and what the thinking is on each side. And so what resulted is what we call the prenups. And I'm going to show a little video just to kind of illustrate it, and I'll talk about it in a second. Did anyone recognize themselves in any of that? I heard some laughter. So, I mean, you get it. The point is really that filmmakers and funders are kind of coming from these different worlds. There are these new funders emerging who may be media savvy, but they don't necessarily know exactly what goes into production. Ideas of editorial control, those kinds of things can become tricky, and sometimes these problems emerge a little bit too late in the process. So, talking to a lot of folks out there, this is kind of a post-inconvenient truth era. So there's a lot of desire out there to get films on the big screen that's going to have a big splashy policy effect. And often those who haven't funded this work before may not realize kind of the process and all of that. So, you're looking at, you've got investors that are emerging, there are nonprofits who want films made about their work, there are individual donors emerging as well, and new foundations who really want to fund film, but they've never really done it before. And again, not only that, most of them don't really fully understand the filmmaking process or distribution. There was one story of a funder who had never funded a film before, and it was early on in the kind of funding process, and the funder said, "So, when's the Sundance Film Festival again?" So like already having visions of this film, at Sundance without even having it started or off the ground yet. So it just kind of shows that there's a need for more communication. So what we did was we developed what we called the prenups. It's a 25-page document that is really easily broken out, and you can download it at theprenups.org. It's free. There's also a short distillation that just kind of gives you tidbits of it, because I know a 25-page PDF can be a little intense. But really what it does, it kind of breaks out the different things that filmmakers and funders should talk about early on, from just general vision and expectations from the onset to roles and participation, who's going to do what, where's editorial control going to be, to business and legal issues. And it's not really a do's and don'ts kind of document. It's really a document that has prompts for things that folks on all sides should consider. So again, you can download it at theprenups.org. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alice, Jessica, and Shadi. I think we're actually out of time for the session, but if you have any specific questions for any of these three, then please find them during our next break, which is right now.